So during this time, I was really into developing my empathic abilities by doing Reiki and meditation. However, I noticed how much of a sponge and open I became. After a while of not practicing, I decided to do a guided meditation to help me fall asleep and reconnect a little. I didn't know which one to choose, so I picked the one with 444,000 views, thinking, hey, why not? Must be a sign. A short moment after I began listening, I fell asleep. I woke up in the dream feeling uneasy, as if something was watching me. In the dream, I was on the living room floor of my parents' home. Being creeped out, I decided to run to my parents' room and wake them up, just like I used to when I was a kid. My parents get up and just go along as if nothing happened. My friend started talking to me about someone who recently passed, and I thought that was kind of odd. I decided to ignore and go see what my father was up to. My dad was taking the dogs out, so I stood there at my door watching my dad and dogs on the front lawn. Then I noticed something off in the distance. It was two beings making their way closer to my driveway. The closer they got, the more hostile they felt. I yelled for my dad and dogs to come inside. The beings ran towards, and I was able to shut the door on them just as they got to it. We stared at one another. One of the beings looked like a stereotypical demon horror woman in a dress. As soon as I was able to make out what she looked like, she turned into a beautiful woman I once knew back in high school, and then shapeshifted back into the dark being. I woke up right after this feeling a little uneasy. It was the middle of the night, so I checked the time, and it was 4:44 a.m. I tend to be a skeptic, but this was one weird experience that has really stuck with me. I was around 5 to 7 years old when this happened. I lived with my mom and my two sisters. I would see my dad on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We lived in a 3 bedroom, 1 bath house next to a funeral home. I used to share a room with one of my sisters, and when I'd wake up in the middle of the night, I'd always run into my mom's room and sleep with her because I was scared. I came home one night from my dad's house. After a short while of being home, probably 20 to 30 minutes, I decided that I'm going to act like I'm sleeping in my bed, and when my mom comes to check on me, I'm going to scare her. So I crawled into my bed, and for some reason I immediately passed out. I woke up around 1:30 a.m. I ran to my mom's room as I always did out of fear. I don't know why I was always scared in this house at night, but it was every night. I got in her room, and for some reason, she's not in there. I checked the living room and she's not there either. I then realised she probably went to stay at the night with her boyfriends. I immediately booked it right back into my room and jumped into my bed. A few minutes passed, and now I'm even more scared because I remembered that my sister, whom I shared a room with, isn't there because she stayed the night with her friends. After probably 5 minutes, I started to hear pots and pans banging in the kitchen. When I heard this, I went under the blankets right away. This goes on for about 10 minutes, and the whole time it's happening, I'm pinching and punching myself because I was convinced it was a dream, which I soon found out that it wasn't. A few minutes after, the continuous noise stopped. I came out from under the blankets, and in the hallway directly across from my bed, there's a man hanging in front of my sister's room. I can't see his head, but I can see the rest of his body. He's wearing a blue tucked-in dress shirt, black dress pants, and black dress shoes. Right after I'd seen that, I think I just kind of stared in pure terror, and I went back onto my blankets and eventually fell asleep. I told my mom and my sister about it the next day, and they were freaked out. We moved out approximately 6 months later into my mom's boyfriend's house. Now I'm 18 and about to turn 19. When I think back on when this happened, I think that it was a spirit from the funeral home, considering how he was dressed. It's weird, because my friend's grandma lives in that house now, and they haven't experienced anything. But that memory will always stick with me. Backstory. When I used to live in Colorado, we lived in a 3 bedroom, 3 bathroom house with a finished basement, which was in a good neighborhood about 20 minutes away from Denver. My mum and stepdad had recently got married, which resulted in us going over to his family's house for the holidays. One time, we went over to his sister's house for Thanksgiving. Around 15 minutes after arriving, we started talking to his sister's Carrie, and we mentioned that we recently had bought a new house. She then offered to pay rent if we would let her move in. My stepdad and my mom talked it over with her, and they eventually came to an agreement for her to move into our basement if she paid rent. A few months later, she moved into the basement. About a couple months after she moved in, my parents would tell me some creepy stories of when they were watching TV in the living room. They told me that one night they were in the living room watching TV. Note that the TV was next to the basement, on another wall to the left. So if you walked around the corner of the basement door, you would be to the left of you. And out of nowhere, a cat toy was thrown up the stairs and it rolled out into the living room. They claimed they heard someone from the basement say, "Here, kitty, kitty," even though my aunt wasn't home. We then told her about it, and she mentioned to my mom that her two younger brothers and her father died in a house fire when she was a teen, and that she thought all three of the spirits followed her. Another night that my aunt wasn't home and my stepdad said he saw someone peek around the corner of the wall by where the basement was while he was watching TV. Alright, so fast forward to about 8 months later. My aunt eventually moves out. Note, a bunch of creepy shit was still happening before this. It was paranormal, but it would just be too much to type. So I was on Xbox and nobody was home. I was playing Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And I was in a party talking to a random kid I had met that day that knew nothing about me. I had to use the restroom, so I told him I'd be right back and left my microphone and controller in my room. When I got back, he told me that after I told him I was going to be right back, a little kid said into the microphone that his name was Michael and that Colby, me, was his first uncle. I'm not sure what the kid who I was talking to on Xbox said back, but he said he also heard him say, "I have to go now," right before I got back onto the microphone. When he told me this, I knew he was being serious because I met this kid that day and never mentioned my house being haunted to him. Plus nobody was home. So I go downstairs scared fucking shitless and I texted my aunt asking her what her brothers' names were, and one of them was Michael, which was the youngest. I don't remember her other brother's name. I told her what happened and just sat in the living room shaking until my parents got home, which then I told them the whole story. Many other things happened like that involving those little boys in the house. That's for another time. My grandmother told me this story. My hometown is Tyne County in the northeast. My father was only 3 years old when this story happened. Because they're in the countryside, the house was made of mud and straw. You can see the beam directly. At that time, people were poor and they had 4 children to be raised. So my grandfather found a job outside to earn money to support the whole family. My grandma was left to raise 4 children and plant a few acres of land to make a living. It was at the beginning of autumn. At about 8 p.m, my grandma was coaxing her little daughter to sleep, and her big daughter and second daughter trembled suddenly. Grandma asked them, "What's the matter with you two?" They trembled and said, "Mommy, there are 2 eyes looking at us on the beam." My grandmother looked up and saw nothing. Maybe a night cat or something. She didn't take it seriously. Just about to go to bed, she heard someone knocking at the gate of the yard. Grandma quickly put on her clothes and went to see, but nobody was at the gate. When Grandma was about to walk to the gate, she suddenly saw a dark figure standing on the roof, more than half a meter, and her green eyes were particularly bright. It looked like a weasel in the moonlight, and she's so afraid that this yellow weasel will do something bad to her children. In their countryside, no one will provoke yellow weasels because it's a creepy creature and very vindictive. Grandma worried about her children inside the house. She picked up the stone and smacked it. Who knows that the yellow leather didn't hide? He stood straight for another while and in the blink of an eye, the yellow weasel disappeared. Grandma was afraid that the yellow weasel would come back again, so she took the children to her mother's house and didn't dare to go home for several days. Later, she sent a message to ask my grandma to come back, and then all of them moved back. After about half a month, one day at about 4 p.m, my aunts played in the yard and looked after my father by the way. When they were having fun, they heard someone talking behind. Hello? They looked around and there was no one. Just about to continue, they heard another hello, very clearly. Then they found that there was a half-tall child not far from them with a lotus leaf on his head, not taller than my father. It walked step by step very slowly and looked so weird. Then it noticed they were looking at it. It asked directly, "Hey, did I look like a person?" At this moment, everyone saw clearly that it was a yellow weasel. The big sister picked up her little brother and shouted, "Go to the house! It's the yellow weasel!" They were running into the house, shouting and howling. My grandfather heard the shouting in the house. He looked out of the window and saw a yellow weasel standing on the wall of the yard and looking into the house. My grandfather rushed out and picked up the shovel. He let the children into the house and went outside. The yellow weasel wasn't afraid at all. He looked at my grandfather and asked him, "Hey, did I look like a person?" My grandpa walked fast with a spade and didn't hit it. Yellow weasel turned around and ran away. It was so weird, so they found a witch nearby. She said that it was because my grandfather ruined its caves and crushed its baby when repairing the dam, so it came to revenge. Then my grandfather apologized sincerely through the witch and hung a lot of amulets on the beam and walls. Then they didn't see it again. When I was 3, my parents divorced and each parent moved back in with their parents, aka my grandparents. When I was with my mom, we stayed in the guest bedroom and slept in the same bed together. It was a full-sized bed with the headboard against the wall, with walking space on each side of the bed. If you were laying in it, the closet was to your left. Almost every night, I saw this figure come out of the closet, walk to the bed, then walk around it, and then eventually go back into the closet. Sometimes it would stand and just hover by the side or at the foot of the bed. It would stay there, but it didn't have a face. It also would change height. Sometimes it was a normal human adult height, other times it was the size of a small child. So I don't know if it was the same figure that was able to change its height, or multiple that took turns. It never touched me or made any noise that I can remember. It would just emerge, pace, hover and then retreat. As far as an appearance, it's hard to put into words and I've yet to find an image that matches it. The closest thing I can think of is maybe a beekeeper's outfit or tulle or mesh material. Its face was just a blank veil and I couldn't see any shape or figure underneath. Anytime I've attempted to Google it, I get things like a zombie bride. It wasn't a dress or a robe or cloak. I remember being so terrified I would hide under the covers or scoot as close to my mum as I could. One night, when it was hovering at the foot of the bed, I remember I was tiny enough to scoot my entire body onto the pillow and was trying to scoot close to my mum. I must have gotten into her hair because she woke up and moved me back to where I was supposed to be. When she'd ask what I was doing, I would point and she couldn't see it. At first she thought I was just having a nightmare, but several other times she caught me staring while looking terrified. Eventually, she met my stepdad and moved in with him. I never saw it again, but any time I was playing with my cousins or over for any family event, I watched it in that room. Has anyone had a similar experience or have a source of what that was? I'm nearly 30 and still remember it vividly. I love art and draw quite a lot. Recently, I drew a picture of my dad's mom who passed away when I was young, which I planned to give him on my birthday. I showed the drawing to my mom and she never mentioned that her mother, my other grandma, would also love a photo of her and her husband because Grandad also passed away quite a few years ago and it's her favourite picture. I started drawing quite late last night. I use apps on my iPad to draw with as I find it quicker and easier. To do this, I usually zoom in on different parts of the picture to get the lines more precise. I was in a part of the picture that contained a car, and I moved upwards towards a tree. But I saw something strange, so I started to zoom out. When I had zoomed out enough to see what I was looking at properly, I was speechless. What I think is a cloaked figure with a grotesque face, sort of a cross between a witch and a demon, can be seen so incredibly clearly lurking underneath the tree. I cannot begin to explain how clear the figure is, and I wish I could post a picture on here. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. I've always believed in ghosts and demons, and frequently watch ghost videos, but I usually try to debunk them as I believe most aren't real. But something about this photo is very different. The fact that it was in my own hands and it had come from my family. The fact that the photo was taken around the 1970s means the photo could not have been doctored in any sort of way. I know most people will think that the figure is some sort of odd problem with the picture, but just looking at the horrifying figure has immediately ruled that out for everyone that I've shown it to so far. It's so strange the terrified feeling everyone who's seen it so far has had. All my friends have said they've wanted to cry as soon as they've looked at this picture, although this may just be because it scared them. The part that scared me the most, though, is the way the figure is posed. It's looking directly at my grandparents with malformed hands outstretched towards them. Another creepy part is that the fact that the more me and my dad look at the photo, the more strange things we seem to find. We've also found a strange figure lurking behind the shoulder of a cloaked one. There are faces dotted around in the picture. I even think I see a shadow figure in the background too. This happened when I was in middle school. I'm about to graduate high school. I still remember every detail to this day. When I was younger, my mother sent my siblings and I to this cute little summer camp in the mountains. It was 1 week in the middle of nowhere. No cell service, no quick way to reach anyone, and we were miles and miles away from the nearest town. This happened in my 3rd year of attendance. The way these campsites were set up goes as follows. You were split by gender and age group. Each campsite had 4 cabins with 5 raised beds in each, and 1 lean-to for the assigned camp counselor. So in your cabin, you've got 4 buddies that you get to know fairly well throughout the week. There's also no bathrooms at the campsites, so if you had to go, you'd need to get a tip from your counsellor and go into the woods. We were about 12 at the time, so always went with a buddy. This one night, a girl in my cabin, who I'd become pretty close with throughout the week, was just talking with me in the dark of our cabin about absolutely nothing. Just 2 kids who couldn't sleep, so opted to stay up and talk until we could. Well, eventually, she tells me she's to go to the bathroom and asks if I'll go with her. I say yeah, no biggie, so we grab our flashlights and sandals and hike over to get some toilet paper and then go back past our cabin. Ours was the furthest out, on the edge of our campsite and a good 20 feet from the other cabins, a little ways into the woods. I stand on the path while she goes up into the trees a bit to do her business. Again, we're 12 and it's cold, and we're afraid of the dark. So she asks me to keep talking to her about so she doesn't freak out. So we're talking about nothing, and I'm doing that little step dance you do when you're cold, swishing my flashlight around to see if I'd find anything cool. I almost never go to the mountains and wanted to know if there'd be any cool plants or animals I'd see in the distance. And I stop myself as my light lands about 13 feet away from me, dead in my tracks. To this day, I don't know what else to describe it other than one creepypasta, The Rake. I know how childish that sounds, but that's the only comparison in my head. It looked like a freakishly lanky, extremely decrepit, pale, hairless person. I could only see its head, shoulders, and from its forearms to its fingers it stretched out as if it was crawling down the path. He had long, spindly fingers that seemed to sharpen at the end. I really didn't know if I was looking at nails or claws, or if it's just skin stretched like that. Its head was pointed slightly downward, and I would later figure that it was as if it was trying to avoid the light beam. But I could still see its eyes. Eyes that still make me shiver if I think about it too long. Large, black eyes. I don't know if it had extremely dilated pupils, or if its eyes were just black. But it was like the eyes themselves bulged out of its head. I was too scared to shine my light any further, and I could see one of its hands slowly creeping towards me. I was petrified in my spot. I didn't move my light off once I saw it. I didn't know what to do in the scenario. I wasn't going to just leave this girl there if it actually was something that might have hurt her. I told her to hurry up. She asked me why my voice was shaking. I remember saying, "I don't want to freak you out. It's probably nothing. I'll tell you when we get back. But when you're done, just tell me. We're going to make a run for the cabin." That really made her move. I felt bad for scaring her, but I myself was terrified. I heard her say done, and I just told her to run. I spun around, finally taking my light off of it, and sprinted so quickly that I caught up to her in seconds. This might have been my own heartbeat pulsing in my ears, but I was so sure I could hear it behind me. We were moving so quickly that we slipped a bit on the leaves in front of our cabin door. I remember two of the other girls waking up when the door slammed behind us as I fumbled with the hook that would lock it. I don't really know how I thought that would help. My friend was freaking out now, asking me what I saw and practically begging me to tell her I was pranking her. I couldn't say anything though, as I'd begun to have one of the worst panic attacks in my life. My breathing became audibly laboured, and someone got up to go get our counsellor, which is what got me talking again. She got about halfway to the door before I said no, and that was what made everyone more freaked out. Eventually, our counsellor heard us and came to our cabin. Someone opened the door for her and she came in, wanting to know why I was crying so viciously and why everyone was panicking. I was able to piece together a coherent enough sentence that she got the gist of. Obviously, she didn't believe me. Who would? But she finally gave up on trying to convince me when she offered to go with me to confirm there was nothing there, and I only cried harder. I slept in the lean-to with her for the rest of the week. I'll be the first to admit that I can't honestly know what I saw. I was 12, it was dark, and I was tired with an overactive imagination. But I know that staring off into the dark has never stuck a terror into me like that before. I still don't really know what to make of it, but I think about it every summer. So I just thought I'd share it this year. I currently live in the Manchester area, UK, and I stay up relatively late, 3 to 4 am. I always close my curtains and windows quite early, 7 to 8ish. However, on this particular night it was warm, and I wanted to get some air through the house, so I left them open longer. I ended up watching some Netflix and YouTube, and it got late, so I headed to bed. I walked into my room and realised the curtains were open and the window. This is 2 or 3 am. I proceeded to close the window and the curtains. However, I stopped and stared out for a little, not sure why. Never seen the streets so quiet, so mystical. It was bewildering. I stood there for a few minutes until I saw a single person walking down the street. Not sure where from or how he got there. Looked like a small, pale old man. Wore a small top hat like a bowl hat. Full suit, like from the series Peaky Blinders. It's the best I can describe. He started crossing the road and stopped. I was still looking at what was an old man doing out at 3 am in the morning. He slowly turned directly to my window and watched. As I was shocked, I quickly ducked out of sight. I was there for a little while, peeked up, and he was still staring in the middle of the road. A few seconds later, that felt like an eternity, I got the confidence to peek back up while he was still watching. Giving up, I realised he had already seen me. So I crawled out of sight and walked normally to the window, just to hopefully make him think I wasn't watching him. It's very nerve-wracking at that time of the night. However, this time he was gone. It's a main road. It would have taken him a lot longer to walk over, and then I can still see down the whole road. But he was absolutely nowhere, with shops closed on both sides. Then, the worst experience in my life happened. I heard a knock on the door. 3 very distinct knocks that will never leave my mind. Thud, thud, thud. I did not answer. Another louder knock. Thud, thud, thud. I didn't answer. Who would at that time? And again, louder. Bang, bang, bang. I didn't answer. And then silence. I peeked down my stairs to the front door. My house has a sensor at the front door. When someone arrives, the porch light turns on, and it's pitch black. I slowly tried to look through the window panel in the door. Nothing. No one was there. A cold breeze slowly crawling up the stairs. I returned to my room and lay on my bed for hours. I finally managed to drift off. No idea how long I was asleep for before something I've never experienced before happens. I feel a breath in my ear and a whisper follows. Enjoy your stay. I can't explain it. The only thing I can think of is sleep paralysis caused me to hear a voice due to the events that night. I'm still in the same house, and nothing else happened since, and I'm thankful for that. I used to live with my mom and her ex-boyfriend in a really big house. It was around 6,000 square feet, and it gave me bad vibes from the very start. Whenever I voiced it to my mom and her ex, they would just brush it off and tell me I was just imagining things. They were always travelling and going places while I had to stay behind because of my job. I was okay with this. I enjoyed being alone. I was around 19, and after my friends had left for the night, I did my nightly rounds through the house. I would always check to make sure all the doors were locked and the lights were all off. Once I made sure of that, I went to my bathroom to get ready for bed. My bedroom was the only one on the main floor. It was a 4-bedroom house, meaning there were 3 upstairs, 1 being directly over my room and bathroom. My room and bathroom are separated by a small hallway, which can be closed off by a sliding door, meaning there was a door to my bedroom and to my bathroom, which I always left open because I could close off my little hallway. I start washing my face, and as I'm doing so, I hear what sounds like footsteps directly above me. I freeze in place and listen. They stopped. I shrug it off and continue. It's late. I'm just hearing things, and go back to washing my face. Then it happens again, this time a little louder. Again I freeze. I know I'm not just hearing things, but what can I do? They stopped, and I went back to washing my face. Then it happened again. I stop again, and then I hear and feel one of the loudest bangs I've ever heard in my life. Imagine a 400-pound person jumping off a bed onto the ground. That's what I heard. I felt the rumble. If that wasn't enough, right after that, my bedroom door slams shut. I'm freaking out at this point and run into my room to grab my machete. Thinking someone is in my house, I then run into the kitchen yelling, "Whoever's in my house, I'll fucking kill you." I still have soap dripping down my face onto the ground. Seeing that all the doors are still locked, I run back into my bathroom to rinse my face off quickly. I pack up my bag and call my best friend. I tell him what's happening and he tells me to get the fuck out of there. So I keep him on the phone as I finish packing up a bag and get outside into my car. As I'm pulling out of the driveway, I notice something upstairs. Every single light is turned on. I know for a fact they weren't on 20 minutes before when I checked everything. I didn't even think twice. I just kept reversing and didn't look back at the house. I've seen enough scary movies to know that there would have been a figure in one of the windows staring at me. I went back the next day to see if someone did actually break in. There was no sign of forced entry, all the doors were still locked, and nothing was missing. All of the upstairs lights had also been turned off. Fast forward 6 months and we move out. My mom then tells me that the house was turned into a hospice after the original owner, from the 1930s, was widowed and got lonely. She turned the house into a place for those with no family to die peacefully, and not alone. I love ghost stories, but not the Western kind. I love Asian ghost stories. Perhaps because that's where I grew up with. I find them spookier than Western ghosts. Due to the language barrier, there are not a lot of Malaysian ghost stories available in English. So 6 years ago, I started a YouTube channel where I read ghost stories that are mainly from Southeast Asia. I'd record my voice reading the stories at home, of course. Since I was living with another girl at the time, she also happened to be my colleague. We were working at a customer service call centre that operates 24 hours and our shift rotates weekly. Our 2-bedroom apartment was so small that there was barely any privacy when it came to noises, so I would usually only record when my roommate was out. I didn't want to bother her with my voice, and I would prefer not to have sounds from her going about her life in my recording. One time, my roommate was working the overnight shift. She left around 8 o'clock in the evening, and I just got home from work 2 hours prior, so I decided to record my second video. About half an hour after my roommate left for work, I started recording in my bedroom. I think it was a little bit more than halfway through the second story, and I heard someone entering the apartment, which was weird since her shift should at least take about 8.5 hours. I thought, if she came home early, it would be more than likely that she's not feeling well. So I went to check on her. When I went to look for her, she was nowhere to be found. The only logical explanation was the sound was from the next door unit, so I went back to recording. Not more than 15 minutes later, I heard the sound of a chair being pulled from under the dining table and followed by water running in our shower room just seconds later. Confident I was home alone, I went to check it. My bedroom door was facing directly to the shower room door. As soon as I opened my bedroom door, I had a clear view of the opened shower door, revealing a dark shower room. At this point, I was getting nervous. My thoughts were all over the place. I froze for a bit before decided to look into the shower. The sound of running water could still be heard. When I flicked the shower room light switch on, the shower was running but there was no one in there. I turned off the shower and went looking for my roommate again. Maybe I missed her the first time, but still, I found nobody in the apartment. I was a little nervous, but I was determined to continue recording. I want to be a YouTuber and hoped one day I could quit my job and tell ghost stories full time. So I did. I finished recording the stories and went straight into editing. Around 1 AM, I needed a toilet break. The toilet was separate from the shower and can only be accessed through the kitchen. After I finished my business, while I was passing through the kitchen, I could hear a giggle from the living room. That stopped me in my tracks. I had a clear view of the well-lit living room. There was obviously no one there. At this point, I knew I was not alone. I ran into my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I hid under my covers, and that's when I heard something trying to open my bedroom door. It went on for what felt like forever. I fell asleep, and for some reason, I finished editing my story and posted it a few days later. Everything quieted down for a little while, so I decided to record another story. This time, I was recording during the daytime. It was my day off, and my housemate was out shopping or something. Everything went smoothly. So smoothly that I was able to post the video by the time my housemate came home. That night, we decided to watch a movie together. Before we started the movie, I went into the kitchen to make myself some snacks while my roommate picked a movie. Our TV is positioned on the same wall that divided the living room and my bedroom, and the sofa right across from it. So you can see the kitchen door and shower room door when sitting on the sofa. As I was coming out from the kitchen, I asked my roommate if she had found a movie. She was looking at me with a surprised look. "Didn't you just go into the shower room like 30 seconds ago?" she asked. I just shook my head and went to sit. The topic died there and we picked a Malaysian horror comedy movie. Mid-movie, our shower room door whipped open violently and we heard what sounded like a giggle. My roommate decided to sleep in my room that night. That was the last time we watched anything related to ghosts. Since then, I often hear furniture being moved, giggles and saw shadows moving in my peripherals, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. Sometimes even when my roommate's home. She's also experienced some spooky stuff in the apartment, like her back being tapped by something while she was in the kitchen, hearing my voice calling her name when I wasn't home, and a shadow running from the kitchen into the shower room while she was watching TV in the living room. We stayed there for a few more months until my roommate quit her job to move back to her hometown, and I decided to move in with another colleague. This new house was much larger. It was a 3-story house. I stopped recording ghost stories for a while after that. Even though I love ghost stories, I don't particularly like experiencing one. It took me about 8 or 9 months before I had the courage to record another ghost story. So this happened in 2019, but to fill in the gap, I moved from the old apartment to a new place sometime in December 2016. My life got busy, but managed to record one video sometime in 2018, but didn't really stick to it. I got married by the end of 2018 with a Canadian citizen, and we moved into our rental 3-bedroom, low-cost flat on the other side of the city. Due to him not having any working visa while staying in Malaysia, he was mostly doing online studies and helped me around the house. After a while, he got depressed due to lack of progress in his personal career growth. So I came up with the idea, why don't we restart my Ghost Stories YouTube channel, but this time he can help me edit and tell stories. He agreed, and we started recording sometime in September 2019. The first video was recorded with ease. Nothing scary happened. It was all fine and dandy. However, we did avoid recording at night, especially after my husband found out the legend behind the theme song that I chose. The song is called Ulet Mayang. It is said that this song was a mantra that was used by witch doctors to repel or cleanse dark spirits. For easy understanding, I'll refer to it as an exorcism from now onwards. According to the legends, the song came into existence after a witch doctor tried to save a fisherman who became unconscious after going on a fishing trip. It was said his soul was trapped in the jinn's world after 7 jinn princesses became fond of him. After a while, the exorcism ritual becomes more elaborate and includes dancing. With the time passing and the people of Peninsular Malaysia was introduced to religion, first Hinduism and then Islam, and animism fades, the Ulet Mayang becomes nothing more than just a folk song and dance routine. However, it's still rumoured to cause possession among dancers while performing, so it became less and less popular. But I thought it would be a good idea to use it as a theme song, and I somehow thought it would be okay if I sang it myself because it's not real. I admit, it was not a very smart move. However, things started to get weird during the recording of the second video. We did our recording session 1 story a day kind of thing, because even though my husband was a stay-at-home husband, I still have a full-time job. During the recording of the last story, we ran a little late and ended up recording until close to dusk, about 7 PM. Since our goal was to post every Friday, and that was a Friday evening, I talked my husband into editing the video that night. Since our video is just an audio video and there's not that much to edit, it only took him less than 2 hours to get it all done and posted on the YouTube channel. The rest of our night went like normal until it was time to go to bed. It wasn't even midnight, and we were laying on our bed trying to fall asleep. Then we heard what sounded like chairs being dragged from upstairs. Soon after, we heard the same ticking sound like when a handful of marbles hit the floor, also from upstairs. After this has been going on for about 5 minutes, reality hit me. We are the upstairs neighbours. Our apartment is only 5 stories high and our unit is at the top. My first guess was there's something squatting on the roof, but then there's no simple or easy access to the roof at all. Since my husband didn't mention it and I didn't want to freak him out, I just kept quiet about it. We went to bed, but we keep hearing the noise almost every night since then. One evening, we were watching some anime in our living room when suddenly, an empty cup that was on our dining table just randomly fell onto the floor. We were both startled and got up to check it out. We tried to reason it as the wind knocked the cup off the table because it was a plastic cup, even though that doesn't make any sense. There's no window in our dining room. The other windows were kept closed as we ran the AC. The same night, I was woken up by my husband half screaming. When I got up, he looked like he was having a bad dream, so I woke him up. He told me that he saw an old woman with a scary face walking towards him from our door. He had our headboard on the wall opposite to the door, and our feet were pointed towards the bedroom door. He said he thought he woke up and saw the old woman approaching him, but he couldn't move, so he tried to scream. He insisted that I play some Islamic prayer until he fell back asleep. After the first time my husband had the night terror, we continued to record another video. The last video we recorded in Malaysia. Partly because we wanted to do it in hopes that it will turn into something we do full time, as we enjoy telling ghost stories. My husband was finally excited about something. Since the time he became a house husband, it was a nice at-home activity for us, like spending quality time. While recording the third video, posted at the end of September 2019, we were careful to do it only during the day. However, it didn't save us or make the haunting in our home any better. In fact, the furniture dragging and marble dropping has become more frequent, up to the point that we can hear it every night. On top of that, my husband's night terror also became more often. Playing Ayatul Kursi became our nightly routine, and when we forgot, my husband will have night terror. It never stopped the sounds though. We keep hearing it. Apart from that, things were quiet for the rest of 2019. The most frightening thing happened in January of 2020, a couple of weeks before we left for Canada. My husband and I were packing our stuff, and we stayed up until much later than we usually do. We were using clothes that we were not planning to wear as wraps for our breakable items, and putting them into boxes in the living room. Our living room was well lit, and we usually leave the balcony light off. This made the glass door to our balcony become more reflective, and we can barely see outside apart from the lights coming from the parking lot and the stairs light from the flat across from ours. We also have no drapes for our balcony door. The landlord didn't put up any curtain rod there for some reason. We didn't install our own because we didn't know how long we were going to be staying there. We were waiting for the results of my PR application and were planning to move to Canada as soon as we got it. As we were packing, we heard what seemed like someone knocking on our balcony door with their long fingernails. We both instinctively turned our heads to the balcony and stared at it for a good 15 seconds. We saw nothing, and then we heard it again. There was still nothing. Our balcony was bare. There's nothing out there that could hit the glass door. My husband grabbed my arm and signalled me to get up, and we both went into our bedroom, and I played the Ayatul Kursi from my phone. After a couple of minutes, we can hear the nails in our bedroom window now. I decided to recite Ayatul Kursi myself with a louder voice. Midway, our window rattled for 2 or 3 seconds, and the knocking or tapping sound disappeared, and we didn't hear it until we moved to Canada. The furniture dragging and marble dropping noises can still be heard every other night. I'm not sure if the next tenants who lived in that flat face the same issues or not. I'm just hoping they don't. After we moved to Canada, we stayed at my mother-in-law's apartment for a year. We recorded a couple of times during the pandemic out of boredom and hopes that we're in a new country and maybe it'd be alright. It's 2007. I live in a gated subdivision that hugs the lake in a small town in East Texas. The main road within the subdivision goes from the entry gate into a mile-long circle and ends back at the gate. Most of the houses in the neighbourhood sit on the lake, and the rest of the neighbourhood away from the lake hadn't really been developed as much and was mostly wooded. All the other roads are within this circle, so very small. It's my birthday weekend. I'm turning 13. My best friend is staying the night with me. We wake up the following morning and decided to go on a walk around the neighbourhood. Everything starts out fine, very normal. My family had lived in this neighbourhood for about 5 years, so I felt very familiar with it. My brother and I rode our bikes around frequently. So we start walking down this long street, and we see in the distance this large black animal, resembling a cat, that was pacing back and forth across the road. Now, there had been a sign posted around stating that a large black panther had been seen in the area, so we immediately stopped. We decided instead of going forward that we would cut through the woods to a parallel street and continue away from the animal. So we continue on for a while, and then we start running into aggressive black dogs. Like, in any direction we go, there's a black animal that seems dangerous. I started freaking out because we'd cut through the woods several times, and now I didn't know which way we needed to go to get home. I had my little flip phone at the time, so I tried to call my mom and see if she could pick us up. In true fashion, my mom didn't answer her phone, so I left a voicemail stating, "Hey, we're at the corner of street and street. We're kind of lost. Can you please come pick us up?" So now we're just like, okay, let's just try to figure out how to get home. We start walking and turn down a road, and then we come upon this tiny, old, abandoned house. It immediately struck me as odd because I'd never seen this house before. There were no other homes on this road, and the house looked really dilapidated. Broken windows, chipping yellow paint on the house, a cooked door on the hinge, super patchy grass in the yard. Basically, any 13-year-old ideas of a nightmare. We ended up stopping right in front of the house and kind of gawking at it. I think we were both trying to wrap our heads around the fact that it felt like we were in some kind of horror movie. I think my friend kind of dared me to go up to the house or something. Obviously, that was not going to happen. Then the wind picked up and opened and then slammed the front door of the house. We immediately sprinted away from the house. Shortly after that, we got to a place that I was familiar enough with to know how to get us back home. Okay, so now we make it home, just glad to have survived the whole ordeal. We ran into the house and I immediately confronted my mom about the fact that she didn't answer her phone, and we needed her because of all the crazy things we just experienced. She checks her phone and there's no missed call or voicemail on their phone. Very mysterious. I told her of the ordeal, and then that was kind of it. After all that happened, I was so caught off guard by that house because I'd never seen it before. And after that, I tried to find that house again. I never could. Even after I got my driver's license, I drove literally every street in that neighbourhood and never saw it. I never really told anyone about it after that because it honestly sounds crazy. Over time, I just almost forgot that it had happened, and then one day the memory randomly came back to me. I think that if I'd been alone, I probably would have convinced myself that that didn't happen or that I imagined it. The only reason that I know that it was real is because I had someone with me that can attest to the fact that we shared that experience together. My family lived there for 16 years. We grew up there as kids. It's just so weird and I have no explanation. I've never had any experience like that in my neighbourhood before or after. So to lay the background, I had just started my first job as a nurse tech, CNA, at a local nursing home. My mother had worked at the place about 20 years prior, up until the point where the state board shut it down due to the poor living conditions and care for the residents living there. After sitting empty for 15 years, a new owner came in and bought the place, and I was one of 4 total night shift staff, 2 per night, 12-hour shifts. At the time, we had around 70 rooms, fully renovated and furnished, but 68 of those rooms were empty, with only 2 rooms having 1 resident each. The building had 1 long hall that split into 2 plus signs for the ward. In the middle of the intersection sat a nurse's station on each end. All the unused rooms remained empty, with doors closed, and the halls to those rooms closed and locked, to keep furniture and supplies from being shifted to other areas. Only the nurse had a key to those halls, and it remained locked in the bedroom. With only 2 patients, me and the nurse would often be sitting at the desk just chatting or playing on our phones most of the night. Thank goodness for my sanity, because otherwise I would have convinced myself I was crazy. There were so many times we would hear noises, banging, doors slamming, and even screaming coming from those closed-off halls that we would actually call the police to come and search the locked corridors for intruders. I'll exclude specifics because it'd be way too many. The first experience we had, there was one short hall to our right that housed the dining area, and one patient room only. It was our quarantine room for anyone who had something we deemed to put the rest of the patients at risk. It had never not been used by patients or staff since we opened. Things began with the call light in that room going off by itself randomly. Some nights, it would go off 2 or 3 times over the course of 12 hours. Of course, we laughed and chalked it up to just faulty wiring or equipment. So we actually unplugged and removed the call light from the room. Seemed to fix the issue for a couple of weeks. Then one night, the call light in that room began ringing with no call button plugged in. We go in together to find the shower in the bathroom turned on by itself. These things continued in this room throughout my year at this facility. After speaking with my mother, she recalled this room from her time there as housing a patient that was essentially brain dead, and said she was convinced the man wasn't because the same things would occur then as well. The second major thing that occurred, one of our patients was a woman in her 50s who had severe mental deficits, but was physically able. Her room was the first, closest to the station. It was always the same. At least once a week, during nightly rounds, she would always go missing down the long corridor, and we would always find her in the same room, about 20 rooms down toward the next nurse's station. The TV would always be on in the room, and she would be in that bathroom putting on makeup, saying she was getting ready for her date with the man in that room, one time with her sleeping in the bed. There was no man. Things got worse. About 6 months ago, when one night we heard a scream, we went in. She had fallen and hit her head on the table, and is going on about how he pushed her. She goes off to the hospital, needed brain surgery to stop bleeding, and comes back unable to get herself from bed. She could no longer get herself to that room at night, but every single night when I got to work, I would turn that TV off at the start of my shift, and sometimes in the middle of the night, it'd be back on. Third and final for this post, near the end of my time at this facility, I was caring for a woman who was completely blind. Her neighbour was brought in earlier that week on palliative care and unable to wake. He had passed just before I arrived for the evening, and the funeral home could not retrieve him until the next day. At some point late in the night, when doing my rounds, this woman insisted she saw a man standing in the corner of her room watching her. I convinced her it must have been a dream. Just before leaving in the morning, I was getting her ready for breakfast, and she again insisted that she saw him again, and she knew it wasn't a dream, and described this man. The description matched exactly to a picture his family was showing me from when he was 20 to 30 years younger, a couple days prior. So when I was a kid, maybe about 9 to 16, my family lived in an old house, and I had some very scary experiences there. That story's for another post, but it made me a believer. And even as a believer, I want to share one of the most terrifying experiences that I still question if it really happened. So at this point in time, I was working at a locked end-stage dementia unit. Basically, all 30 patients on the unit couldn't even tell you the time or season of the year. There were a couple exceptions to this. There was a woman who we'll call Betty for privacy reasons. She had dementia, but her husband didn't. He was highly intelligent, but had suffered a stroke leaving him paralysed, and chose to live on the dementia unit to share a room with his wife. His wife, even with dementia, helped care for her paralysed husband and would often sleep throughout the day, and stay away in a rocking chair all night in case her husband needed assistance. Her husband's health declined, and eventually he passed away. After a couple of days, she didn't even remember having a husband. With her husband no longer around keeping her physically busy, she began to become weak to the point she was no longer able to stand. We had to use a hydraulic lift to get her out of bed into a wheelchair, and for cost and space, she was relocated into a room with another bedridden woman who we'll call Susan. Betty spent the better part of a month bedridden before this story occurred. So I was working a day shift but had been asked to cover a night shift. Night shifts on this unit was always great because no one ever called for help, and basically all that was required was to make sure no one had wet the bed every couple hours. Each room housed 2 patients, So when doing my bed checks, I'd taken 2 sets of sheets and adult diapers. I dropped one set off on the left, one on the right. As I walk in, I drop off a set at the foot of Betty's bed, who's sleeping. I pull the curtain about halfway closed for privacy, then move over to the right to Susan, also pulling the curtain about halfway closed. I opted to change Susan's wet bed first because she was what I'd call a wiggler, and it was always a struggle to hold her still and try to get everything fixed. I'm just working away on Susan's bed, and out of the left corner of my eye, I see a birthday balloon tied to the foot of her bed move, as if there was wind blowing on it. About a second later, I see the curtain slightly get pulled back. I turn my head to look, and Betty pokes her head around to see what's going on from her rocking chair. This was a huge surprise to me, as Betty hadn't been able to stand, even with assistance, for the last month. But it was nice seeing her back to somewhat normal. I think nothing of it, and continue with Susan's bed. As I finish with Susan just about a minute later, I open the curtain and find Betty not in her chair. My heart literally stopped. I look at Betty's bed. She's sound asleep, with the bed linen still at the foot just as I placed it. It's one thing for me to just have seen a balloon blowing, or even maybe the curtain shift. But I saw with my own eyes, clear as day, that curtain get pulled back, and a head with wild Einstein hair, just like Betty's, lean forward from that chair and look at me. I didn't tell anyone, but I guess my demeanour or look was enough. My co-worker asked what was wrong, and asked if I had also seen the man she used to take care of in that room 5+ years before I started. I was reluctant to share. Even after this happened, it was so unreal. I question if I'd believe it if someone told me. Can't tell if it's playing with me. I cleaned a lot of clutter from my home. Posted before, but now it seems like a cruel prank. A bit of backstory. I live alone with my dog and cat in a haunted apartment. I'm 22 and not a big person. I'm small and thin, but I have some muscle and can handle myself. I came home about 2 weeks ago and my bedroom door was wide open and banging against the wall. My dog was cowering in his cage with my cat under his front legs. So I did what any idiot with no brain would do. Went to check it out. The comforter on my bed had been pulled back and the drawers of my dresser were pulled out. I thought someone had broken in at first, but the fact that the door was still banging on the wall when I walked in made me believe whatever it was had still been in my apartment. Now I have to say, I have a sliding glass door that connects my ground floor patio to my bedroom, but it lets out a horrible screech when it does open, so I knew it wasn't used. I was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, and I'm staring at the mess, and it was horrible, like someone ransacked my bedroom. I was about to call the police when all of a sudden the dresser drawers were all pushed back in all at once. Then last night, my dog had woken me up by kicking me in the stomach. He called it stretching. But my closet door opened right in front of me, and the light turned on. At first I thought I was dreaming, but whatever it was made my dog growl, and then the light turned off, but the door stayed open. I also have 2 paintings hanging over my bedside tables, and last night the painting closest to me started to just teeter side to side. It's something my cat likes to do, but my cat was curled up against my stomach under the blanket. I had the TV on, so it wasn't the dark, it was the kitchen light on with the door open. But I'd laid there completely still for a little until it stopped and I finally went back to sleep. I woke up this morning and the door's almost completely closed. There's a tiny crack separating the folding door from the door frame, and now the big Harley Davidson leather jacket in my closet has a sleeve pulled through the crack in the door. I went on leave for 10 days and just got back on the 8th of this month. But while I was cleaning the clutter away on the 9th, I'd found this gag gift I got from my buddy. It's a Haribo Ouija board. I've never used it. I got it for my buddy as a joke to scare him, and it showed back up at my door a day later. He and I laughed about it, and I didn't have the receipt to return it to Barnes & Noble, so I kept it. At first on my bookshelf, now it's in the hall closet, but I was cleaning off the breakfast bar. So if you and I were standing next to each other, and both turned our heads to the right, we could stare into the hall closet. I heard what sounded like footsteps, and all of a sudden the Ouija board fell off the cat carrier in the closet, and the box and all slid all the way until about a foot in front of me. The box was still by the closet door, and the actual board and planchette were the ones closest to me, like it wanted me to play with it. I remember blinking at it for a few minutes, just watching it on the ground. Both of my pets were on the couch behind me, staring at it also. I felt a cold breeze on the back of my neck, and something touched my back. It felt like a hand, like it was pushing me towards the board, but I didn't do anything of the sort. I grabbed some leftover sage I had cleansed the board before picking it up, and picked it back in the box and shoving it back to its place in the closet. For the last few days, each time I open the closet door, the lid of the box is off, and the board is on the floor. My pets can't open this closet door. My friend and I were rescued from the ditch during a snowstorm by little phantom people. While returning to New Mexico from a visit to my friend's family in Iowa, we were caught in a snowstorm on the Texas Panhandle. We were on Highway 60 right outside of a town called Canadian when we went off the road in this little Honda car. We tried digging it out and using the floor mats for traction, but to no avail. We could see what appeared to be lights of a farmhouse nearby, and although it was 2 a.m, we elected to knock on the door and see if we could get help, instead of freezing to death in a rare Texas blizzard, out in the middle of nowhere. A tiny old woman answered the door, and I mean tiny, 4 foot something and ancient to boot. We explained that we were stuck and needed a pull out of the ditch and how far for the next town, etc. Her tiny, maybe 5 foot something, ancient husband came out and said he'd pull us out with Zuzu and to follow him to the barn. Out in the barn was an old Ford Highboy with a CB radio and a .357 revolver in the front seat pocket. We all climbed in the cab. He rubbed the dash and said, "Come on, Zuzu," and proceeded to take us to where we had gone off-road and yanked the little car out with no problem. We made it to Canada and stayed in the nastiest roach motel I'd ever been in, and slept on top of the covers with all my clothes on. The next day, we drove back to New Mexico with no other incidents. Since I was on Highway 60 pretty regularly, I figured I'd stop in during the day and drop off a gift and say thanks next time I was in the area. The problem is that right outside of Canadian Texas on Highway 60 near that curve, there is no house, no little old people, no barn, no Zuzu either. I've driven by there a dozen times since we went off the road that night in December, and I've pulled up the area on Google Maps, and there's just no trace of them. My buddy and I just concluded that guardian angels got us unstuck from the snow and vanished.